This is Into the Storm, tragedy to triumph, transformation. This is where we become buffaloes, not cowards. Buffaloes bravely fight into the storm, not painfully away from the storm like cows. You be the buffalo, not the cow, or the coward. This is raw, real, and rewarding for men with spiritual values. I'm Ryan Smith, your host, and I'm joined with Bunker Weimer, your co-host.
Unconditional love and differentiation, where they meet and part. If I love someone, am I going to love them? I'm going to love them unconditionally. But if I love them unconditionally, then how can I have boundaries? Because wouldn't boundaries limit the love that they will feel from me? Today's episode is all about how to set boundaries and find peace.
Yes. So this is love, unconditional love and boundaries, where they meet and where they part. To start, I have a story to tell. A few minutes before the services started, the townspeople were sitting in their pews and talking, just small chat. Suddenly, Satan appeared at the back of the church. The doors exploded. Sparks were everywhere. Everyone started screaming, scrambling for the exit, trampling over each other in a frantic effort to get away from evil incarnate. Soon after they had exited the church, there was only one man. There was one man left in the church, an elderly gentleman who sat calmly in the pews without even moving, seemingly oblivious to the fact that God's ultimate enemy was in his presence. So Satan walked up to the old man and said, "Don't you know who I am?" The man replied, "Yep, sure do." "Aren't you afraid of me?" Satan asked. "Nope, sure ain't," said the man. "Don't you realize I could kill you with a word?" said Satan. "Don't doubt it for a minute," returned the old man in an even tone. "Do you know that I could cause you profound, horrifying agony for eternity?" persisted Satan. "Yep," was the calm reply. "And you're still not afraid of me?" asked Satan. "Nope." More than a little perturbed, Satan asked, "Well, why aren't you afraid of me?" The man replied, "Been married to your sister for the last 48 years. Oh, well, it's good to have you. Today's podcast is how can you create the resiliency when people don't treat you the way that you want? When you feel like Satan is on your shoulder, on your back, and you have the weight of the world and people are maybe abusing you. How do you respond in that type of situation that would create, where you're still at harmony and peace? Often if people are mean to you, what's our natural reaction? Get mad back. But the thing is that comes with the price. And the price is that we lose our peace. We begin to get angry and get in our fight, flight, freeze, reptilian lower thinking brain, and we lose too. And so how can we really be calm in the face of adversity when people don't treat us outside of what we expect? When they're not loving to us, how do we respond with love? So that is what today is, and finding the peace and the answers for that.
So I guess to begin, let's define simply what boundaries are. A boundary is a limit or an edge that defines you as separate from others. We don't let people stand too close to us. We usually have appropriate proximities. I remember I was in a body language class at college, and they talked about how just naturally we all stand about 2 feet away from each other when having a conversation with someone. And anytime that we step within that 2 feet, we automatically have a pullback. And so we definitely have unspoken boundaries that we follow in society. One of them being the physical, like how close we stand to each other. Emotionally, we have the same. If you don't feel like you have any emotional boundaries, hopefully after this podcast, we will give you great tools. That way you will know how to implement them. But as an example, if someone you love is physically abusive to you, then you wouldn't want to be physically near them because it's unsafe. But you can still have unconditional love for that person. Your boundary is what protects you. Emotionally and mentally, we can do the same thing. Now, down below here, we have a chart. We have 7 types of boundaries that we wanted to cover with you guys today. How did you want to do this, Ryan? Should we just start in the top and go clockwise?
Yeah, so this comes from positive psychology, and I think this is really helpful that maybe when we think of boundaries, we just be like, stand back, boyfriend. This ain't, and I think it's maybe just only in conversation when someone's rude. But let's expand it a little bit more. This is maybe more complex than you originally thought. So we're gonna blow your mind away with this. So there's one, two, three, four, five, six, seven types of boundaries that the positive psychology community sets up. So um, they are emotional, material, internal, conversational, physical, time, and mental. So could you just read those off? Maybe starting with mental.
Yeah, absolutely. So it gives a little definition, but it also gives an example of how you could speak this to somebody. So for the mental, freedom to have your own thoughts, values, and opinions. And the example would be, I respect your perspective, although I do not agree.
Yeah, and that's kind of this. Can you see the balance between there's still love there, but yet there's a clear boundary?
I think there's a lot of power in that simplicity as well. I think sometimes if someone disagrees with us, we feel very overwhelmed and we want to just push back and fight back. But that's just such a simple thing of saying, hey, like, I know what I think, I know what I feel, I know where I'm coming from. It's different than yours, and that's okay. And that's it.
Yep, that's okay. We can agree to disagree. That sometimes, like a problem in relationships is when agreeing to disagree, or you disagree that you disagree.
Well,
And
agree
it's
to
not
disagree.
it's not okay, it's not okay to disagree. And that creates all sorts of imbalances in the relationship, and you're gonna disagree. And so if you can't agree to disagree, then the alternative is that we just can't be friends. We can't, our relationship is now threatened. And so that's where, and in that place, then it becomes very conditional love, and we want to be able to maintain this conditional love. Um, so we're going to continue, but we are going to define a little bit more about this conditional love as we go along. So stick around. Emotional. How emotionally available are you to others? As much as I want, and so the quote is, as much as I want to support you right now, I do not have the emotional capacity. So I think this is in a time maybe when someone's venting or complaining, and sometimes you just can't hear it, and you just don't have the heart, the mental capacity to validate. And that's real, that's human. And sometimes they are really needing it, they're crying, but it's 2 a.m. and you're just like, sorry, man. Sometimes you need to maybe put on your big boy pants and be there for them, but uh other times you just it's not that crisis, and so you got to make those judgment calls. So as much as I want to support you right now, I do not have the emotional capacity.
I think an important word to go along with boundaries is the utilization of the word no. Sometimes that can be a very hard word for people to use, especially people pleasers. So not only in emotional boundaries, but any boundaries, sometimes you have to say no, but you can do it in a very loving way, saying, hey, I love you a lot, but this is what I'm going through right now too. And so at this moment, I'm not super available for you. And I'm really sorry, but I hope you can understand. I think that goes a long way because you're appealing to your human side, saying, hey, just as much as you're struggling, me too.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that the thing that I is so important to me is we move at the speed of the slowest train. And that's it's a Ryanism there. And what that means is, especially when we validate, or maybe we're going through crisis, whoever's in the biggest crisis, we try to lend to that person. And what that means is maybe you need to validate the other person before you get them to understand your perspective. There's so many things in here, but we're just gonna this kind of the overview of what we're going to be talking about. So the next one is material.
I gotta turn sideways to read this one. Hang on. Sorry. Material is monetary decisions, giving or lending to others. Example, I already lent you money last week, so not again right now. I think this is huge. Sometimes people just want and they want and they want. At what point do you say enough is enough?
Yeah, and I think this episode would not be complete if we did not say no is a complete statement or a complete sentence. No is a complete sentence. Whoa, for some reason that's hard to come off the lips. Maybe because I have problems with that. But no is a complete sentence. So, nope. and they're like, you can just leave it at that. You don't need to justify your answer. And so that can be very freeing and liberating. Can I have the, can I borrow the keys? Can I have this? No. Well, why not? Because I'm not able to do that. And then you just leave it and try to just change the subject. But I want to help you. And I love you. I appreciate you, but I can't give that to you right now. Well, why not? I'm not going to go there right now. It's just because I love you, but I'm not going to do that. It's maybe just, the context matters, but hopefully you can, if there's a loving relationship, no is all that's needed to be said. Next one is internal self-regulation, energy expended on self versus others. So there's an internal boundary. And I think this kind of goes into the topic of, you know, I'm an introvert, I'm an extrovert, and I get my energy from other people or from having my alone time. And I think I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but I just think that everyone is both um, has um, they are introverted and extroverted in some ways, and maybe some places they're more developed, and maybe there are some introverts that have very, very, very little extrovert. But I believe that everybody gets energy from others as well, even if you don't think so. And you just, anyway, not going to go down that. But what I'm saying is that, so here's the example. I have been social all week. I need the weekend to myself. And so it's just important to rejuvenate by yourself. That can be very healthy to just have time for yourself and just can't come. It's not good for me. I know I planned on it, but I wanted to be upfront with you as soon as possible. I can't make it to your party. I just have had so much going on. I need time by myself.
Or you just say no.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, the next one is conversational. The description says topics that you do and do not feel comfortable discussing. The example, I would rather not be a part of this conversation. I think that's huge, especially when you're preserving like your own energy, if you will. Some conversations are negative and they kind of tear everything down. I think people who gossip, people who want to complain and want to be, what would be the word, like empowered to be more negative. Sometimes they look for that affirmation in you. Can you believe that so-and-so did this? Let's talk about it. And you can remove yourself from that conversation, say, you know what? And you can do it in a nice way. You can say, hey, like, I love you and them. Like, I know they can be difficult, but I just rather not focus on the negative. I'd rather just focus on positive things about them. I think it's better for me. Or you can just say no. Get away from me.
Well, you don't want to do it like that because is that unconditional love? Like there's
That's true. Yeah.
like I think there's a place. Today's really about balance. Where is the balance in being unconditional love? But yeah. So okay. So next one, physical, privacy, personal space, your body. I prefer not to hug people I do not know. So maybe there's a culture where hugging is part of it, and you just don't feel comfortable about that, and you could say, I'm not going to do that. And I always hear kind of what's coming up to me is like mothers with maybe a lot of children, and they always feel like their body is a jungle gym, and like there's always a baby on their hip, or they're someone's always just on their leg or something. And so it's important maybe to recognize the boundaries that you need for your body. So that is important. So especially maybe in a dating situation and even in marriage, there's times when you need to put your boundaries on that. Time, the last one.
How much time you spend with someone or doing something. The example is I can only stay for 30 minutes. I can remember my mom doing a lot. I kept wanting to show her stuff as a kid. Mom, look at this. Watch me do this trick. Watch me. She goes, okay, I only have 15 minutes and I gotta go do my stuff. Or, hey, I only have a few minutes to help you out with what you need. What are your priorities? She was really good at setting boundaries that way.
Yeah. So hopefully this is very clear that there are different types of boundaries, and it takes this position of love and not being a jerk. Like you can set your boundaries and not be a jerk. And like, let's be honest, that's hard. Boundaries are maybe more of a masculine kind of
Right.
uh, uh,
They're
you
kind
know,
of
it's
assertive.
an assertive, it's a strong energy. And so that's a place where if you're not careful, you can come across as a jerk. You can come across mean, unloving. And so you want to be able to create your boundaries, but also be able to express love. And you need to be able to do both.
Right. I guess I have my own little synopsis of boundaries according to the psychology of Bunker Weimer, but we can think of boundaries as walls. Sometimes walls are viewed in a negative way, and sometimes they're viewed in a positive way. So in a negative, or for example, in a negative way, like if you were a prisoner and you're stuck within these walls, like to you, those walls are negative. They're holding you in, they're holding you back. But to the people on the outside, they're positive because people are scared of criminals, right? And I don't think all criminals are bad, but just for the sake of the example, let's say like the most dangerous criminals, people feel positive about those walls because it's keeping society safe. We can think of the walls of our home as positive because they protect us from the outside world. They give us privacy and protection. They give us protection from the elements and other people. These walls kind of help organize and structure our lives. And I think it's best to think of boundaries in a positive way, as just explained, because they will protect you.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, just let's think about it in the physical, just like in the relational world, we have it walls in the physical world. And just like I think a house is the best analogy. You love your house. It's that structure is really helpful to create some stability for you. You don't want to get snowed on, you know, just living in the sticks. And but even homes, they have doors where those walls come down and there's a permeable place to go in and out of those walls. And if you're listening to podcast, you cannot see this, but those on the Facebook channel can see this. And I have a very elegant drawing of stick figures here about boundaries. And I'll just try to create a word picture here. So in the middle of the picture is you. Just imagine there's a stick figure around you, and then there is a big circle around you, and it's just a clear line. There's no dots, there's no breaks in that, and that would be a clear boundary. There's no way to permeate that boundary. No one can get in. So for example, we have prisons, and the prisons are supposed to be this clear boundary where those criminals cannot get into society. They cannot get in there. And maybe there's people that you create a clear boundary. You delete them from your phone. Maybe you move to another place so they don't have your address, they don't have your phone number, and that would be creating a clear boundary. They can no longer get a hold of you. But then there's a semi-permeable boundary. So then imagine another smaller circle closer to you that is kind of like a dotted line, a dotted circle. And at some places, it's still where the line is, you cannot get in. But then there's other places where they can get in, and just think of like a house with a door. There's places where people can pass, but people cannot pass. I don't have a door right uh like to the outside to the bathroom, because I don't want anybody walking the first thing into the bathroom. There is a door once you're inside my house, you can enter the bathroom, but there's not like a door to the outside from the bathroom. So that's kind of like a semi-permeable place. You don't want people like more intimate places. Um, and then there's maybe someone right next to you, and there's like, you don't want someone, I guess, so close there's like no boundary. And like maybe imagine like opposed to little uh let's see, I don't know, just like there's dots and then there's line permeable boundaries. And so someone like your wife or your girlfriend, they are going to be much closer to you, and the boundaries are going to be much more easy to penetrate. They're going to be easier to penetrate. So think about boundaries like that, is that there's different relationships that you're going to place them in different boundaries into your life. And the people that are closer to you, you're going to have less boundaries with. The people that you don't know and don't trust, you're going to have more walls, more boundaries set up for there. And so the people that you don't know, you're going to have to be better at saying no to.
Absolutely. And I guess to further illustrate what you're talking about, we kind of came up with the idea of like religion versus spirituality. the concept that like anything that's a structure or anything such as boundaries need a structure to maximize the fluidity of power, because there's a power source flowing from those things. Like from you have a love source that's flowing, but if you don't have walls or boundaries, then the fullness of that power will not penetrate where it is needed. And so the
Yes.
concept of kind of like religion and spirituality that we had talked about previous before this podcast started was like religion is kind of the organization, but spirituality is kind of like the power. And so the two together are the most powerful, but oftentimes people have them separate. The example that we kind of came up with was in the scripture of the New Testament, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they were a very religious group, but they weren't very good on the spiritual side. So when Christ came, he brought an influx of spirituality, and it really destabilized them as like they didn't know what was going on. And then there's people who are like kind of on the notion of, hey, I don't need a religion to worship God, which is very true. But they're very far on the spiritual side, no religion with it. But if you combine the two, there's power in both that combine. I don't know if like you had like to.
Whoa, that's amazing. I love that. And so I think ultimately, Bunker, what you're saying is our power, your power, I'm talking to you, the listener, if you're just free for everybody and you're just only exercising unconditional love, only exercising, you're just always available, you just have no boundaries, then you lose your power. There's no real power. If my doors to my house are always open, then it's going to get really cold and there's no real difference about there's the I lose the warmth of my home. So there's a reason why we have a doors to our home. There should be doors to your relationships as well. There needs to be sometimes, when to open the door and maybe when to close the door, maybe sometimes to lock it. And I love what you're saying is that religion or spirituality is like the power,
Right.
but religion is the boundaries around that power. It's a structured way. And I love Elder Ballard's talk he gave a few years ago about this. The church is not salvation. It's only a vehicle. Think of a boat. It's just the boat to carry the message to the promised land, to get you to go there. If you're trying to go to the promised land, you need a boat. If you're going to cross the ocean, you're not just going to meditate yourself to Hawaii. You got to get in a vehicle, or a boat or an airplane. You got to get into a structure that's going to take you there. And religion is that boundaries, that structure. And if let's say you have this really good water from Fiji and you want to give it to the world, you got to put it in a bottle, which has a structure. You got to have it in some boundary to transport it and to give it away. Just like your love is stronger when there's boundaries. And so this is the real gem of tuning into the TTT here, is that most people, when I've heard boundaries talking, they're not also talking about unconditional love. These two concepts are talked about a lot, but I've never heard them taught together at the same time. And usually when they talk about unconditional love, they're like, yes, unconditional is the best. You need to be unconditionally loving towards people and be like God. And God is unconditionally loving. So you should try to strive for that ideal as well. But as we go into this, God is also conditionally loving. He has conditions, and that's what we call the commandments. He has expectations for you. And what's the scripture? There's all sorts of, you cannot deny the justice of God. And like the mercy is the unconditional part. He'll always love you no matter what. That's unconditional love. However, if you break his commandments, there are consequences, and there is the spirit of the Lord withdraws when sin is committed. That energy dissipates, it lessens, and you lose that power when you break those boundaries.
Absolutely. And I think bringing up the character of God and of Christ are perfect examples of boundaries, because they themselves are bound by their own laws. And if they have boundaries, how more important would it be for us to have boundaries in our imperfect human state. And just the example that I thought of was many times throughout the scriptures, Christ would leave and he would go off and pray for a while, or he would go up in the mountain. Like he would spend time alone. And I think if any of the listeners have watched The Chosen, they illustrate that very well in the TV show. But just reading the scriptures alone, you can gather that he had boundaries and he stood up for certain things and he let other things be okay. But he brought an immense amount of spirituality to the religion and all these different things. And so I think going off of that, it's very important to know that, like Ryan has talked about before, meeting in the middle, kind of finding the balance, because sometimes we withdraw too much for too long and we're kind of isolated, and isolation is not good. But if we're too involved, we're too much like in the thick of it, I guess, with people and parties and friends and family, we can get really drained. It's the same as Ryan saying, like, we're leaving the doors to our house open. All that energy, that warmth, the heat inside will be gone and you'll be cold, be worn out. And so we thought of that scripture where it says iron sharpeneth iron. Like you cannot sharpen iron if you're not together. And so sometimes we as individuals are too isolated, where we don't get the benefit of being around other people, other intellectual minds to run our ideas by, to sharpen that iron. But sometimes if we're together too much, that iron, if it keeps sharpening, we're all just worn out. We're probably be really agitated with each other. And it's contentious. So there needs to be that balance, right? We spend some time apart and some time together. And that kind of leads us to like Moroni 5 and 6, when it says the church did meet together often and would fast and pray and speak one with another according to the welfare of their souls. And that is very much ironing, sharpening iron. And they did meet often to partake of bread and wine in remembrance of the Lord Jesus.
Yeah, we don't go to church every day. We don't have the sacrament every day. It's only once a week.
Right.
There is some order to that. And so it would be an interesting study bunker if we had, what are the times and the context when Jesus did go to the mountains to pray. And, we just finished in the Come Follow Me, the right after he was baptized, he went to the wilderness to gain spiritual power by himself. And that's when, the devil came to tempt him. And he was able to gain spiritual momentum while he was doing his 40-day fast. And then right after that, he went to his hometown and he made his declaration, this day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears. And then, I'm sure there's some other times in between, but I know another time that he went to pray in the mountains is right after, or to be alone and to pray, I'm sure, was right after his great friend and cousin, John the Baptist, was beheaded. He spent some time alone to mourn that passing, his death. And so there was a boundaries he set, and there was sometimes I think he even went away and then the people followed him and then he escaped again. He needed his own alone time. And so if Christ needs his alone time, it is okay for you to put some boundaries for maybe even your friends and your family, your spouse, your girlfriend. You maybe need some time alone. And what's the phrase? Distance makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah. And I think that's perfect to like go along with this. I think there is importance. We can't just be with each other all the time, 24/7. I remember going on my mission and I wasn't very good at emailing home. And my mom would always ask me all these questions. And I said, Mom, if I answer all these questions, we'll have nothing to talk about when I get home, because I would have told you everything by now. Like, you got to let me leave so I can miss you.
Yeah.
I think that is a great, like, a little way to think about it. I guess the thought that came to mind, someone shared this with me recently, but I think sometimes when we set boundaries, it can be hard to stick to our guns. We set the boundary and it's easy to cave after a while. I think especially like parents are big on that, or like girls with their boyfriends. Like, it's like, oh, we need to do this or be this way, or I need to be better at that. And they talk about it, and then 30 seconds later, they just cave. But the thought that I had was the first miracle that Jesus performed was turning water into wine at the wedding. And I thought there's a lot of significance in that Jesus let the water run out, or the wine run out, until he gave more wine. He didn't just keep an ample supply. And there might be a lot of like things we could pull out of illustration, but I think in the sense of boundaries, sometimes we too have to let things run to the end before we can see the blessing or the miracle take place, whether it's in our relationships or with our friends. I have a very dear friend who, he told me about how one of his oldest son was a drug addict. And they loved him and loved him and loved him. And then they came to a conclusion, realizing the best thing that they could do is to kind of like push him away, like kick him out of the house, like have him be gone. And that was a very controversial thing. But he said that was the hardest thing he ever had to do. But setting that boundary is what saved his son, because that was such a wake up call for his son. That said, I can't go home anymore. I need to change my life. And I think sometimes the Lord does that with us. Anyways, that just made sense to relate to boundaries as well within our lives.
Yeah, and sometimes there's like times when you set a boundary that actually brings them closer to you. Like, yeah, I love that phrase. You gotta let me leave so I can miss you. But I remember my dad telling a story about as a missionary, and he gave the Book of Mormon to a family who wasn't progressing. They've been meeting them with for months, and then they said, "Well, you're not progressing, so give us the Book of Mormon back." And sorry, man, you're just not really taking this very seriously. Bye. And then like a few days later, their family's like, wait. Actually, we do want to do this. And then they like set a baptismal date like the next time they met with them, because
Classic callback.
they just needed that. They needed that like rude awakening to find out what they want. And I think there's another time just, but it's not coming to me. So I want to just talk about differentiation. We talked about this boundaries, and I think boundaries, you know, so let's make this is a little bit more nuanced. So the psycho the therapist word is differentiation. And David Snarch, Dr. David Snarch wrote the book Passionate Marriage. This is about love. And a real big part of his book is about differentiation. And differentiation, according to him, and this is what I also agree with, is the way we hold on to ourselves while still connected to our partners. And if you can have clear differentiation, if you're well differentiated from your parents, from your family, even with your spouse, this is what it gives you, that peace. You can live up to your values with integrity. You can calm yourself down, emotional regulation. You can handle your reactivity, not going to fight or flight so crazy. Manage your anxiety so it doesn't manage you. And part of differentiation is confronting yourself rather than changing your partner, a person who has tremendous emotional significance in your life. And so there's many parts to this. I'm not going to read them all, but it's, stop blaming your partner. It only makes you feel and sound like a helpless victim. When you eliminate blaming as a way of being, many new ones will open. You will start putting your attention on yourself where it will do the most good. So there's a lot to this, but one thing that's been helpful to me is sometimes my wife does things I don't like, and surprising, right? But and I maybe interpret that as rude. But one thing and my normal response would be like, "Hey, do you realize how rude you were?" And then confronting her and like, kind of demanding her to change. And that has not gone well for me. But what has been helpful is like when I maybe interpret something that I don't like, I can say, you know what? She can choose to do that just as much as I can choose. And let's say like she can choose to be rude just as she can choose to be loving. And I can choose to be rude and I can choose to be loving. And then I'm like, well, how do I want to choose? I want to be loving. And like allowing her the space, she can make poor decisions. And I give her that, like in my mind, differentiation has been helpful. It's that it's okay for her to make mistakes and I can still love her. But I think for me, when she made a mistake, I'd be like, wait, mayday, 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 you're making a mistake. That's rude. That's incorrect. And then it just went from bad to worse very quickly. But allowing her to make mistakes, say, hey, she just made a mistake, but I'm not going to choose to buy into that. And I can be the bigger man here. And I think that's a part of differentiation.
Absolutely.
Any thoughts on that, Bunker?
No, I agree 100%. I was thinking, the only thoughts that I was thinking about was, I guess, myself and the dating world, right? For men. which I guess maybe would be appropriate to like share because this is a podcast for men after all. But I think the thought that I had was there's a lot of times we get put in a position with our wives or girlfriends and things can be kind of hairy, can be difficult. We have boundaries that maybe we're not doing the best at. But I've found in my own personal experience, the more clear and upfront I can be about boundaries with myself and with her, the better things turn out. And so, in the sense of however I feel about myself, she kind of seems to outwardly express. And so, there's a quote, and I wish I had it pulled up, but it was, "The woman is an outward expression of how the man feels on the inside because they're so connected." And I think about that a lot. And so there's a couple of business guys I work with, and one of them tells me frequently. He goes, "I look at a good business partner based on how their wife or girlfriend is, because that tells more about them." And I thought that was interesting. And so
Can,
they
like
like
for example, like what? If
so
she
like they'll go on to go out to dinner with them and sit and they'll just talk to the wife the whole time and see what she's like and how she is. They'll see how she speaks about her husband, how they interact, like body language, and how like he'll try to offend her sometimes and see how she responds, like say things kind of edgy. And if she gets really upset, that means that maybe he's a little more like insecure as a man, right? And so he goes, "I don't know if I can make hard business decisions with this guy because he never responded
Whoa.
to it. She's responding. She's just gonna a lot more likely to express it. Whereas if she's very comfortable with it, and sometimes he gave an example if he kept kind of giving jabs about things at the wife, and she would just defer to her husband and say, 'Oh, I'll just let you guys talk about that. That doesn't have anything to do with me.'" She was responding to the boundary, right? She would say, "Oh, this isn't my thing. This is your guys' thing. I'll leave this to you guys. I'm not going to get involved." I thought that was cool. I think about that a lot. Yeah.
Whoa, that's
But when you were
powerful.
talking, that's what came to mind, I guess.
And is that like because men are maybe better at just being poker face, but a woman, you're what you see is what you're going to get with them, or
I think so. Because
you're
I
going to
think a man's
communicate.
world, yeah, a
There
man's
maybe
world is very like kind of closed off. Like there's not that expectation of, or that permission, I guess, to be really emotional and expressive. If you're trying to get something done business wise, especially, it's kind of like, hey, might not be perfect for me, but I'm gonna take it as I can get it and make sacrifices. I think the woman is a lot more likely, or the emotional, or you could say the feminine is a lot more likely to express and focus on the injustices or unfairness of the situation.
maybe women are better at maybe articulating, especially more of this
Women are more
emotional
verbal,
side. And so when men are like in business, it's just all about logic and being thing, but just being keeping it straight. But if you can talk to their wife about it, you're gonna see maybe the biased and maybe the maybe nuance that maybe you wouldn't get with
right?
a man. Whoa, that's really insightful. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you bet.
So I'm just going to run through a few concepts here. Just unconditional love is not rejecting them, others, yourself when it goes south. So conditions should not, if you love somebody, then there should be an unconditional love. Like, and it depends, like, and I think this is maybe better like with children. No matter what they do, parents are at a place where they unconditionally love their children. And my wife and I, we talked about like parental, like child parent love should be maybe more unconditional, but then we kind of got into discussion like, should a spouse, should they have unconditional love or should it be more conditional love? And this is my response to that because we do have expectations of our spouse and maybe, but our child, they're learning, growing, and there's maybe there, I think there's just maybe a place where you just care for them. And I think just parents, by and large, there's definitely exceptions to this, but they're just that I think unconditional love comes easier to love their children unconditionally. But I argue that even in with your girlfriend or especially with your spouse, your wife, you need to have unconditional love for them as well. And uh, but it has to be balanced with conditional love, just like God. You always love them no matter what. And what's the phrase? Love the sinner, not the sin. And unconditional love is the opposite of a fair weather fan. They only come out when things are good. That's not, with the vows in for richer or poorer, for better or for worse, I will love you always. That's kind of the traditional vow. And that's what it is. And it's loving someone in the good, the bad, and especially the ugly. When they do something you don't like, what is your reaction? And how can you change that to a positive response? Unconditional love and conditional love are widely talked about, but not usually together, as we've talked about. Conditional love is usually talked about, when we're setting boundaries, toxic people, abuse, and where justice is involved. But here at the TTT, it's really when we've been talking about masculine and feminine energy and how we need to embrace both. It's really about balance. And I think there'll be another episode where we'll talk a little bit more about post-secularism, Eastern and Western schools of thought, combining the one and the search for truth. And
Did you want me to go over
yeah,
bigotry?
or just
Okay.
any thoughts on that, Bunker?
Oh, no. Sorry. I was just reading the next part about, but I can cover it. So it talks about bigotry, obstinate or unreasonable attachment to belief, opinion, or faction, in particular prejudice against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular group.
So that's the definition of a bigot. Bigotry is that basically you're going to be prejudiced against someone because they don't think like you, they're not part of the same group, they don't have the same beliefs, they don't look like you, they don't smell like you, they don't, and maybe you can be an us versus them mentality. And one thing that I really want to put in here that a lot easier said than done, probably be the understatement of today's podcast, but tolerant of other people's intolerance. So when someone is, we talk about loving, you need to love your neighbor, you need to love everybody. We could kind of wrap our mind around that. But I think we don't wrap our minds around, what about mean people? Do we love them? When we say everybody, that really means everybody. And I'm not going to get into the legal stuff like with religious freedom, but I think that, but I am going to touch on it. Just maybe just tap on the can of worms, but not open it. Like the LGBT plus community, part of that, part of the problem with that is they're creating us versus them. Like, hey, love is love, and so don't be judging me based on because I want to be gay, I want to be lesbian, but are they being tolerant? I think, how do I wrap my set? So maybe we don't agree with their choices, but when it becomes, can we, even though we agree, can we agree to disagree and be tolerant of their intolerance? I'm not explaining that very well. Bunker, could you maybe help me out?
I think you're doing pretty good. I think it's kind of the idea, when this might be maybe too edgy to say, but they've talked a lot about we can dislike the sin, but we love the sinner. That's kind of how where my mind went of. But I think unconditional love is acceptance, right? And so just this past week, I had a wedding that I was at. My uncle he's a marriage and family therapist as well. And he's retired. He's in his 80s. And he just made a comment. Nothing was necessarily like going on, but he just said, isn't it wonderful we can come here to this wedding and we can love all these people? And he goes, our job is just to love them. We don't even have to judge them. Isn't that nice? Judging would be really hard. And I thought that was a very sweet disposition to think about, because it is true, right? Like we believe that Christ and our Father in heaven, they're the ones who will manage that. Christ is our advocate with the Father, and the Father will judge us. We don't have any need to. We can just love. And I thought that was, I don't know if that helps explain what you're trying to explain, but that's kind of the thoughts that I had.
Thank you. That's wonderful. I just think when someone's judging you and saying you're being a bigot, you're not being very loving, and they're like judging you, it's easy for us to be like, oh, no, I am not. But I think the real response is that if we really have unconditional love or have tolerance for people that think differently than us, we need to be tolerant of their intolerance. And I think there's so much, I've just seen people like, I think wars are created because of this, that they
keep score. It's one for shot.
The ideology butts heads, and then and then they say they're wrong, I'm right, which you might be, but the higher ground is, even when you know you're right and they're wrong, can you be okay and accept the fact and be tolerant of their intolerance? So um, I bet there's a better way to explain that. Someone can help us out, but that's I do want to share that. And uh, this last week, in as I've been gathering my thoughts with this, um, my friend Trudy and Catherine were talking, and Trudy brought up this from Unshaken, and I believe from Jared Halverson, but I'm not sure. I did a Google search and it didn't come up, but he said this: beware that your knowledge of someone's humanity might eclipse the possibility of their divinity. And so what that means is, even though you have knowledge of their human shortcomings and you know that they're acting less than they could, or their idea your best, you might, if you it's important that you give them the benefit of the doubt, and you don't reject them, because whatever you practice you get better at. And if you get really good at setting all these boundaries and rejecting people that don't think or look like you, the thing is that you'll get so good that you'll start rejecting yourself. And when you don't meet your own expectations of yourself, then you'll reject yourself, and that's never a good place. And so it's just so important. This is in your own best interest to be loving and accepting to other people, so that you can be loving and accepting of yourself, because you're keenly aware of your own shortcomings and how human and all the mistakes you have. So with that, we're going to, be wrapping this up with, what are the calls to action?
We got 3 steps on how you can set better boundaries and experience unconditional love with those boundaries. So step 1 is be as clear and straightforward as possible without raising your voice. So a simple example could be, say Ryan calls me up, hey man, I'd like to get together on this day or later today. And I can say, hey Ryan, that's not going to work for me. Or in other ways, no. And then I can counter, but I'm not raising my voice because maybe I'm really stressed out. And Ryan says, hey, can we get together tonight? And I'm so stressed out, I just bite his head off and say, no, Ryan, leave me alone. It's not quite the same. Step 2 is state your need or request directly in terms of what you would like, rather than what you don't want or like. We do that a lot. Sometimes we say, I don't like that. I don't want this. I don't know about that. The example that comes to my mind is when you're trying to figure out what a girl wants to eat. And she's like, I'm hungry. Okay, you want to go over here? No. You want to go over here? No. And we got to play the guessing game for half an hour. You just say, I want to go here. Or I want something like this. You're really focusing on what you want, because if you focus on what you don't want, you're kind of like Alice in Wonderland, where she meets the Cheshire Cat, and she asks the cat, which way should I go? And the cat says, depends, where do you want to go? And she says, well, I don't care. And he goes, well, it doesn't matter which way you go. But we have intention in our lives, and we're setting boundaries, we're moving forward. So we're going to figure out what we want. And step 3.
And if I could just say,
Yeah.
This maybe kind of contribute to women. So, but I think we do this as men too, but we'll say, hey, do I look fat in this dress? Women, that's like the thing. But what you're really saying, you're fishing for a compliment, is like, do I look sexy? And then you set up your guy to be like, yeah, you look great.
Yeah.
So just, if you're wanting a compliment, just say, don't I look good in this? And then, or something like that. And I think that's just so important. A really good, great call to action. Just be very clear in your language. I want this. And even in an argument, it's so important to be like, hey babe, I don't want to argue with you, and I really love you, and we had this disagreement earlier. Can we find a way to can we find some common ground, or at least agree to disagree with this? If you can set that up at the very beginning of an argument, you are 10 times, I don't know, 100 times more likely. I don't know the statistic, but you're really setting yourself up for success when you can say, this is what I want.
Perfect. Thank you. So on to the final and 3rd step. Accept any discomfort that arises as a result, whether it's guilt, shame, or remorse. And so maybe you set a boundary and someone lashes out at you because of that. So you tell them no, and they freak out. That's like their thing. That's not your thing. And you have to be willing to accept that, just saying like, wow. And I think in those moments, you really see people's true colors as well. When you tell them no, where does your relationship stand? Do they just want out of you? And when you tell them no, do they still like you? Or is it, oh, I can't believe that you would be this way, act this way?
Yeah, and I think just accepting, that's like real manhood. You accept your emotions and like, hey, I'm feeling I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling shameful right now. And I think identifying your emotions is human, and a real man understands that there's an emotional component and they can claim it. And I think that's and I think, sometimes in boundaries it's hard. And so you're like, no is a complete no is a complete sentence. And so sometimes you can maybe be going to a party and then all of a sudden you just get this really funky vibe that this is a no place, you shouldn't be going there or something. So you need to be like, hey, I I need to go and I can't do this. And maybe you made plans to do something, but you got to listen to your heart as well. Well, good. Well, we would love to hear from you. You can place your love and your questions directly to my email at makeabigleap@gmail.com.
As you listen to this episode, I hope that you've had the opportunity to reflect on yourself and what you can and need to work on. If you need help, run to Ryan immediately. He is the boundary expert. Your peace awaits you.
Let me end with two thoughts here, one by C.S. Lewis and this poem by Hillel. What am I if I am not for myself? When I'm not for myself, is there anyone for me? If not now, when? Now is the time to love. In closing, this is from C.S. Lewis's book, The Weight of Glory. The load or weight or burden of my neighbor's glory should be laid daily on my back, a load so heavy that only humility can carry it, and the backs of the proud will be broken. It is a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities that we should conduct all of our dealings with one another, all friendship, all loves, all play, and all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal, but it is in mortals whom we joke with, work with, snub, marry, and exploit. In mortal horrors or everlasting splendors. Next to the blessed sacrament itself, your neighbor is the holiest object presented to your senses. Thank you for joining in. We're going to love you and leave you. Till next time.
Peace.